in for such a treat. This is the high-tech chapter of this series. There are 5 videos in the Hinduism series. It doesn't matter what order you watch them in, but you should watch all of them. This one is about a history of India, but don't make too big an expectation out of this. We are not going to cover India in every detail, hardly, in 8 minutes, 9 minutes. What we're going to do is get you a sense of a big sweep of what happens in India's history and how it ends up developing such a diversity of Hinduism. We're going to go all the way back 4,000 years ago to get this thing started. But before I do that, I'm going to introduce my high-tech, a map of modern India. Yes, I drew this. The orange boundary is modern India. The yellow on either side. On the left is Pakistan, on the right is Bangladesh. Distinct separate countries today. Since 1947, this is what India and Pakistan and Bangladesh look like. The trick here is that you have to eliminate boundaries to get some sense of what's going on. Forget national lines and just see this whole region, the yellow and the orange together, as the Indian subcontinent. That's the only way we're going to make sense about what's going to happen. Boundaries are much, much later in history. And now, going back 4,000 years ago, I'll introduce my other map. This is something of what it would have been like then. Notice no boundaries whatsoever. And what we're dealing with is a lot of rivers. Rivers play a big role in geography, especially cultural geography, so you want to make sure you take that class. But these rivers, right here, this set, is where Hinduism begins, but not like what we know. What we have is about 4,000 years ago, there was a series of cities along these rivers in the Indus River Valley, I-N-D-U-S, Indus. Indus is the word from which we get Hindu. Hindu is a pronunciation of the Muslims who came in later on. And then it's not a term anybody ever used for themselves. India isn't even called India. It's called Bharat. So Indus is simply the Muslim way of labeling those people who live over there by those rivers. So the Indus River Valley is where it all begins, with Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, and other cities like this. They were very cool cities. We have all kinds of archaeological evidence. You can go check out a video someplace and see the way the cities were laid out. It's really magnificent on an architectural level and an engineering level. But we don't have a real clue whatsoever of what they were like. They didn't leave a writing system that we can decipher. They left some art, but we're not sure what to make of it. For instance, there's a little seal that's got a bull on it, and it makes you wonder if the cow wasn't sacred for them already 4,000 years ago. But we don't know. And there's another seal that's got a guy with dread-looking hair and seated in a meditation position, and sure looks the way Shiva comes later on to be represented in the tradition. But we don't know if that's Lord Shiva. We just don't know. In fact, in these cities, as magnificent as they are, the one thing that seems to be missing is ritual centers. Ritual centers are the place where public worship happens. It's a key for a lot of cities in history of the world, except there isn't anything like that. Did they not have a public worship life? Did they have a private worship life? Did they do things in the open air so they left no evidence? We don't know. What we do know is about 4,000 years ago, a new group of people moves in. Now, I want to use 2 labels. I want to call the people who were living there around 4,000 years ago in that river valley. By the way, that river valley today is part of Pakistan. I want to call those people who were living there 4,000 years ago the Dravidians, D-R, Dravidians. And the people who come in starting around 4,000 years ago, we're going to call the Aryans. That word should be familiar to you, but you need to listen closely because Hitler was really, really wrong. The Aryans are people who lived up in the steppes, and that is kind of like up by the Black Sea and Caspian Sea. And starting around 4,000 years ago, they began to migrate out, and they migrated one direction, they migrated another direction across southern Europe, they migrated across northern Europe, and we know that they made it all those ways because we can see it in the languages. For instance, the word for Father is very similar all the way through those traditions. Or the word for God is similar in all those traditions. So those languages indicate a connection that works its way up to a a mythical language. And I say mythical meaning it's constructed. We know there was something there. We don't know what it was. We wouldn't know what Indo-European language sounded like 4,000 years ago, but we can sure see that it ended up developing in multiple directions. So those people moved into the Indus River Valley, and as they did, they pushed the Dravidians away. Now I say pushed. There's no evidence of some big giant battle between these groups. The Dravidians don't seem to have ever pitched a war to defend their lands. They seem to have either assimilated into the Aryan traditions or they moved on. Moved on makes sense because, as you can see, you can follow rivers all the way across the north of India. The Himalaya Mountains are up here, so what we're essentially doing is following along the base of the Himalaya Mountains to the other side of India. They also moved down the western coast, and once they got all the way over here, they moved down the eastern coast, so that today the Dravidians are especially strong right here in the south. Yes, they continue to live. Their language is still very much alive, and in fact, there's a church here it's an Orthodox church in the valley that uses a Dravidian language for its worship language. The Dravidians have a very different culture today from what the Aryans had back then. Our question would be, does that reflect a difference in their culture back then? Again, it's dangerous to leapfrog 4,000 years of history, but what it seems to look like, and this is all I can say, is seems to look like, is that the Aryans had a father god at the top, a sky god, a thunder god, a god of storms, would be Indra in Hindu tradition, or it would be Zeus or Jupiter over there in Greek and Latin and Roman tradition. And that sky god had underneath him a collection of other deities who served various functions. On the other hand, the Dravidian culture seems to have been very female-centered. Rather than have someone above, they speak of what's at the center. And that female today is the Shakti tradition. And you'll hear about that when you do the Hindu gods and goddesses and Brahman, that other video. So, what you have in the south is a reflective, perhaps, and keep that in mind, perhaps, of the conflict between these two traditions 4,000 years ago. But 4,000 years is a long time, and there has been over the course of time some serious overlap. However, to this day, there still is a Vishnu tradition and a Shakti tradition that are rather distinctive. This begins a process of India's history in which there are peoples from the outside coming in again and again and again. And the next big wave is going to be the Muslims in the late 600s. After Muhammad dies, the Muslims begin to expand out and they enter into northern India. And they leave a mark. It has an impact. But long before that, even from within, the Buddhists had begun to have an impact, and the Jains had begun to have an impact, and people moved back and forth across the Himalayas. Later on, when we get to the 1600s, after the Mughals had had their impact, along will come the British, and they'll have their impact. So what you get in India is an ongoing incorporation of the outside world. So that today, what happens in India is not a pure thing that has been maintained for 4,000 years, but initially an encounter that continues to re-encounter other groups, and every step of the way it changes and grows. That should do it for this one.